So I was watching the YouTube channel Shadiversity, and I've come to the conclusion that I like this guy. I think his opinions on storytelling are fundamentally incorrect, though. It's weird that you can like someone and still think they're dead wrong about most things. What do I mean by this? Okay, he has a series where he talks about what weapon would fantasy races actually use. Gives you a basic understanding. It allows you to have a basic understanding of, certain medieval weaponry, and I'm not going to say that that's not fun to know, but I will say that it's fairly pointless to why we actually see dwarves with hammers, orcs with axes, and elves with bows. I mean, those aren't done because those are practical concerns. They're done for story reasons, to invoke an idea in your head on what these races are like. For example, dwarves are typically depicted wielding hammers for the reason that a hammer can represent building something, but it can also represent destroying something.
Mighty hammer Mjolnir, forged in the heart of a dying star. Its power has no equal. As a weapon to destroy, or as a tool to build.
And sometimes fascism, but usually not in the context of fantasy. So it's given to the race that is known for being craftsmen. Similarly for orcs, they're typically depicted with axes, despite the fact that, bow and arrow would probably actually be more practical if you were an orc, because an axe represents something about their personality. In this case, what can an axe be used for? To cut down a tree, or cut down a person. It's something used to cut things down, to destroy. So you give it to the violent antagonists.
They come with fire. They come with axes. Gnawing, biting, breaking, hacking, burning. Destroyers and usurpers, curse them!
Keeping in that pattern, I think you can probably make the assumption of why elves actually use bows. Because it's a weapon of precision, and we imagine that an immortal would be an incredibly precise person. As such, with this more recent video where he points to this lightsaber being impractical, I gotta say, who the hell cares? It's Star Wars. It's far more steeped in mythology than it is realism. That observation is fairly pointless. But an observation that in Star Wars, Luke Skywalker shares a lot of parallels with King Arthur really contextualizes things and allows you to look at things in a new way. Suddenly his depiction in The Last Jedi is starting to make sense to a few people who just realize he's based on the same person that Arthas is.
This entire city must be purged.
Beyond that, I've always found that chasing the realism dragon is kind of pointless, because there's always going to be something that you don't know. And regardless of how much research and time you put into something, you're going to throw something up that is going to be unrealistic. A good example of this is in the book series The Stormlight Archive, which as far as I can tell is really trying to be grounded and realistic as it possibly can, despite the fact that there's magic swords and shit. But there's one thing about it that doesn't make any sense. The gender roles in the society are malformed. I'm not going to get too much into details other than just to give a quote that I really like. Treating men and women the same makes them different. Treating them differently makes them the same. Another way of putting this is, how many heads of state in England have been female? Roughly half. How many have been female in the US? None. And it's fine that Brendan Sanderson isn't being realistic about this, because this is a story that he wants to tell. This matters far less to me than the observation that, hey, this Nohadon character shares remarkable similarities with the Buddha or Marcus Aurelius. With the Buddha, he shares the idea that he came down from his kingdom to walk among his people, kind of started an entire rigid set of virtue ethics, that kind of thing. From Marcus Aurelius, he's very much a philosopher king, that kind of thing. That is an interesting observation that is interesting to talk about, because it's about the people, not necessarily about just the world building, which, again, anyone can make up a history. And no, I'm not saying you're wrong if you like realism. But Lord of the Rings is going to be remembered for far longer than Game of Thrones. If you know anything about either one of these series, you were probably aware that the authors had completely different intents when they were making their story. One was trying for a grounded, realistic setting, and mostly succeeded. Again, as grounded and realistic a place with fucking dragons can be. And one was trying for an almost modern mythology. A lot of the language usage in Lord of the Rings is to give a sense that this is a story that is far older than it actually is, which lends a sense of gravitas or importance to the writing that you don't see repeated often in a lot of fantasy works. This is why I say Lord of the Rings is going to be remembered for far longer than Game of Thrones. One was made to be remembered, the other is based on forgotten knowledge. Quick reminder that all of this isn't personal. Again, I like Shadiversity personally. He seems like a decent guy. I just think his advice isn't the best. Basically, you can write heroic fantasy based on his advice, but you're never going to write something legendary.
There's heroes and there's legends. Heroes get remembered, but legends never die.